All right, the tour and trip request.
This was submitted as a first read. I received one phone call about the tour and trip request, just, so I think the first trip is for January 18th, and there was some concern, like, is that right when we're trying to come back to school? If students are going to Wisconsin or riding a bus to Wisconsin for a couple hours, is that the best timing? I think this is something that the board needs to discuss. Again, it's a first read. So, Dr. Freitas, I know I sent the questions that were submitted about the trip, so if you wanted to address those real quick.
Yeah, so the question submitted is related to, recruitment or what's going on this year. So students that have attended previous trips have reached out to Mr. Shermack. Currently, he hasn't put anything more than just the approval request because, he doesn't want to let anybody down. And we still don't know, right, the state of Wisconsin or the country in the future. So students have reached out to him. He's making a note of that. But, as we get closer to January and February when we do those, when we possibly could do those trips, he'll be communicating, to the greater student body. And then there was another question about just activities in general. Currently, we have 8 activities that have been in schools, 16 virtual, and 4 that have not met. That's a little update on our extracurricular activities.
And that report you sent me, I'll forward it out to the board on my Friday update.
Yeah, I didn't send an email, but I have some concerns as well. I appreciate the fact that they put down so much information. I think it was titled like COVID considerations or something like that, like COVID safety guidelines. But I think that some of them are still, for me anyway, are a little worrisome. Like it talks about social distancing when possible. Well, I think it should be social distancing at all times. It talks about like at lunch where the students would sit at a separate table, 6 feet apart, but then it goes on to talk about how if they need to, they'll stop at a restaurant on the way home. So then you have students, like where do they eat? Are they eating on the bus? It's a ski trip. If somebody gets hurt, you're talking about a student having to go to a hospital, in a pandemic. So I do have some concerns. Can I ask, are the chaperones all staff members? Or will they be all staff members?
I know in the past there have been staff members, yes, correct.
And staff don't have any concerns sitting on a bus in close proximity to kids and eating in a restaurant with kids? I mean, I know there's so many concerns about being in the building. Like, this is not worrisome?
Different staff members feel differently.
Yeah, feel differently.
That's all I can say to that. But obviously the sponsor, feels comfortable enough to, if permitted, by the board, of course, and if, conditions are acceptable in Wisconsin to do the trip.
I also got the impression, though, it says will find. Like, I don't think he's got all that, in my opinion, the way I read it was that he doesn't have all that worked out yet or all his volunteers lined up yet either.
It just makes me uncomfortable because bringing kids into the building, like we control the environment in the building, and we heard from Joel tonight, who is doing an amazing job, like disinfecting and wiping everything down every hour. And so I have a higher level of confidence in students in that environment, but this is an environment that we don't control, that we don't know the cleaning processes. We don't know. So that it just does cause me some concern.
Well, and the size of the group, what are the limits? And is there a problem going into Wisconsin?
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I had to look at the activity itself is it's in the low risk category, according to the Department of Public Health. However, it's the transport there. You're looking at close to maybe a couple hours each way. And I think, sometimes these school buses or charter buses, especially in winter, they can be, petri dishes. And just when we're trying to do the best we can to get the kids back in school, I'm not comfortable in favoring that with the possibility of mass transmission or some type of outbreak. And we'd have to, take steps back once we go at that point back in January, February.
I think we're all for student engagement, students having an outlet right? But what's the risk and what's the liability? And one of the sort of compromises that I sort of thought of when I was on my way here today was perhaps Mr. Shermack would consider splitting. You know, he gave us both trips right now, and I don't think I could commit to January now, but possibly in January, depending on, and I'm not saying it's an absolute, but maybe in January, we could look at the February trip and see if we feel any better about it. I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I feel like maybe that's something.
Yeah, like,
Or-
I don't
or
want
maybe
to
I'm-
take an
maybe
opportunity
I'm
away
not.
from kids. Absolutely.
What?
I don't want to take an opportunity away from kids.
Right.
I really don't. But I just want to ensure their safety because they're going to an environment that we have no control over. So that just, it does worry me. And it does worry me if a student were to get hurt. I mean, I've never skied, but it looks difficult enough. I mean, what would happen in that situation?
Well, it's horrible if a kid breaks his leg and then
Well, we
has to
did-
go to
We did have a student get hurt 2 or 3 years.
3 years ago, when we first got
But the
on,
hospital
right? And you have to
situation
go to a
today-
hospital in another state and you can't have
Very
anybody
different.
go with you?
Well, I would think if they're a minor, that an adult would have to go with them in
Well,
a
one of the
hospital. but-
chaperones, I believe, went, right?
Right, but I think
Yeah,
what
but
they're
in
saying,
COVID-
under the pandemic, you're not, a lot of times you're not allowed to come.
Yeah, you can't
drop
go
off
in the
at the
hospital.
door, you're only allowed one. Let's hear anything on this side of the table, just to see, is it similar concerns of what you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would tend to defer this until January and have a better sense of what our return to school looks like, how successful it is.
I would
And
agree.
where IHSA is with sports, I think it's another factor. I absolutely support it. I just think the timing, I'm not comfortable with tonight.
So one of the reasons that they submitted this, because you're supposed to have at least 2 reads for the boards, there's a certain amount of days that the policy says. But I do think, Dr. Freitas, it's probably a good idea, we'll leave this on the agenda, but I do think we should just be focused on the February trip.
Okay.
I think from hearing everything and seeing like that first trip is in Devil's Head, which is right next to Wisconsin Dells, that's a good 2.5, 3 hour bus ride. So I think like they're saying, you're talking about students being on the bus together for 6 hours, confined space, there's a lot of concern. So maybe if we look to possibly shorten the distance, maybe look at something like Wilmont or Alpine, and maybe look more towards February after we establish our back-to-school plan in January. This is something we could revisit. So maybe take some of these concerns you heard tonight back to Mr. Mannon, Mr. Shermack, and revise this, and we'll put it back on the agenda again in January. Do you have any concerns with that recommendation?
No, I think that's very fair, knowing that we're in this global pandemic, so I'll go back with Mr. Mann and Mr. Shermack and work on those details.
As someone who used to ski back in the day before we got too fat, you're bundled up, it's a long day, you're kind of hot and sweaty, then you get in the car, you're going to get on the bus with another 25 or 30 hot and sweaty. I mean, it's just it's a lot of stuff that maybe we want to take a pause or take a step back for January and maybe look just for February.
Okay.
All right,